then let's get on to the next passage, everybody. Now, first things first, of course, it's going to be about the passage. So the passage speaks about Stephen Pinker's new book, Rationality, what it is, why it seems scarce, why it matters. Offers a pragmatic, so pragmatic basically says a very objective dose of measured optimism, presenting rationality as a fragile but achievable ideal in personal and civic life. So the book tends to offer the fact that it's possible for one to be rational, it's fragile, but it is definitely an achievable ideal, especially in the personal and in normal conduct of life. Pinker's ambition to illuminate such a crucial topic offers the welcome prospect of a return to sanity. It's no small achievement to make formal logic, game theory, statistics, and Bayesian reasoning delightful topics of charm and relevance, to which the author even appreciates the style of writing because he says it is no small achievement to make formal logic. So it's very difficult to be able to penetrate into people what logic is, what game theory is, what statistic is, what basic code of conduct is. So he's very optimistic about it, and he really says, with this book embarks the return of sanity. It's also plausible to believe that a wider application of the rational tools he analyzes would improve the world in important ways. And it's just not going to, help the personal conduct, it's also going to help the society at large. His primer on statistics and scientific uncertainty is particularly timely and should be required reading before consuming any news about the COVID pandemic. And then he says, in light of pandemic specifically, he says the way the statistics and the scientific uncertainty has been mentioned, it's particularly timely. That means it's come exactly in the time when we actually needed it. And one must read before consuming any news around the COVID. Broadly speaking, more broadly, he argues that less media coverage of shocking but vanishingly rare events, from shark attacks to adverse vaccine reactions, would help prevent dangerous overreactions, fatalism, and the diversion of finite resources away from solvable but less dramatic issues like malnutrition in the developing world. And what's going to happen is when one has read about it, it's not going to let the media affect us with overreactions, with fatalisms, or any sort of diversion of finite sources. Because the way the media projects, it's in a way as in, it's doomsday. There isn't anything that can be done to be able to bring oneself back from the situation. But he just goes about by saying that there's going to be a solvable approach to it altogether. It is a reasonable critique, and Pinker is not the first to make it. No, unfortunately, Pinker is not the first one who's come up with something like that. But analyzing the political economy of journalism, its funding structure, ownership concentration, and increasing reliance on social media shares would have given a fuller picture of why so much coverage is so misguided and what we might do about it. So everybody knows, and there have been attempts previously also that have been made to be able to expose what the media does. But then understanding that ownership is an issue, structure is an issue, having a follower engagement is an issue. All of these are probably the reasons as to why we understand why the social media tends to misguide and does what it does. Pinker's main focus is the sort of conscious sequential reasoning that can track the steps in a geometric proof or an argument in formal logic. So the way Pinker has written is in a way in which we can use the modus operandi and actually come to some sort of sequential reasoning with all of the kind of arguments that has been given and back it with logic. Skill in this domain maps directly onto the navigation of many real-world problems, and Pinker shows how greater mastery of the tools of rationality can improve decision-making in medical, legal, financial, and other contexts in which we must act on uncertain and shifting information. He then goes to say that, if we are able to if we are able to develop a skill on this, we will really be able to navigate ourselves with a lot of many real-world problems. We'll be able to tackle them. And then we'll be also able to make some very important, crucial, and logical decisions in the varied fields that have been mentioned. Despite the undeniable power of the sort of rationality he describes, many of the deepest insights in the history of science, maths, music, and art strike their originators in moments of epiphany. Now, of course, there's undeniable sort of rationality which goes everywhere, but we also have to understand that a lot of times, there is a breakthrough that is made, and that comes to the originator in a moment of epiphany. So epiphany basically is a tube light moment. You're like, aha, something has happened. From the 19th century chemist Frederick August's discovery of the structure of benzene to any of Mozart's symphony, much extraordinary human achievement is not a product of conscious sequential reasoning. And then he says that not everything has to be sequential reasoning. I mean, the greatest of the artwork has also been a moment of instant realization. Even Plato's Socrates, who anticipated many of Pinker's points in nearly 2500 years, showing the virtue of knowing what you do to know and examining all premises and argument, not simply trusting author's authority or charisma, attributed many of his most profound insights to dreams and visions. In fact, even Plato, Socrates, who had written back then most of the points about what Pinker has to offer, goes about by saying that a lot even comes along. So it's just not about the premise and the argument. A lot also comes around with the charisma and the way the authority has been talked about. So there is a lot of weightage that is actually given to the dreams and the visions. Conscious reasoning is helpful in sorting the wheat from the chaff. So conscious reasoning is not something that's going to go to tell whether your idea is right or wrong, but it's just going to take out all of the all of the disturbances, the challenges. So it's like sorting the wheat from the chaff. And it would be interesting to consider the hidden aquifers that make much of the grain grow in the first place. And it will help you understand that is this something that really backs itself in the long term with logic, or is it just all out, all out, it is just epiphany and that there is no sequential logic to it. The role of moral and ethical education promoting rational behavior is also unexplored. Towards the end, the author goes about by saying that the role of ethical and moral education is also something that we have not explored as yet. Pinker recognizes that rationality is not just a cognitive virtue but a moral one. So it's just not something which is born in the mind. Cognitive is anything that's intellectually stimulated, but it's in fact a moral one. But this profoundly important point, one subtly explored by ancient Greek philosophers like Plato and Aristotle, doesn't really get developed. But then you might know of it, but it doesn't really get developed. This is a shame, since possessing the right sort of moral character is arguably a precondition for using rationality in beneficial ways. To which he goes about by saying, while a lot of people have actually said that this is a precursor to it, but the fact that it is a shame because possessing the right sort of moral character, of course, I mean, one doesn't have to say that out loud. It's unarguably a precondition, but of course, something that seems to again be elusive in today's times. So that is what the passage is about. A very easy passage at that. He just goes about by saying how much it is important and how it's going to help clear out and how it's going to, put a lot of things into symmetry, and that ethics and morals are basic preconditions to reasoning. Okay, and with that idea, let's get on to the questions. The author endorses Pinker's view on the importance of logical reasoning as. So the author is endorsing, which means he's in agreement with the Pinker's view on the importance of logical reasoning. So why is logical reasoning important in today's times? Let's see, because it equips people with the ability to tackle challenging practical problems. Pretty much, yes. I mean, this is an umbrella option, takes into account all things that we have. Definitely an answer. Let's reserve this. Focuses public attention on real issues like development rather than sensational events. No, it's important because it will help us distinguish between the two, not to give attention. This can't be an answer. Provides a moral compass for resolving important ethical dilemmas. Ethics and morality are a part of logical reasoning. It is not to help us solve them. So this can't be. Helps people to gain expertise in statistics and other. No, you don't gain expertise, you gain expertise in the statistical analysis of the situation. So this cannot be an answer either, which means the correct answer over here will have to be option A. I hope that one was clear. Let's get on to the next question. According to the author, for Pinker as well as the ancient Greek philosophers, rational thinking involves all of the following except. So what is the one thing that it doesn't involve? We have to look for the exception, the one option that is false. So 3 of it are correct, 1 of it is false. Involves the belief that the ability to reason logically encompasses an ethical and moral dimension. Last paragraph, opening lines. This is true. If this is true, it can't be my answer. Involves the primacy of conscious sequential reasoning on the basis of seminal human achievements. Okay, that's not what it is, because it's not the primacy of conscious sequential reasoning. In fact, it's about the fact that when you apply rationality to your decision is when you get conscious sequential reasoning, and then you understand how to approach the situation. It's not the primacy, it doesn't become the most important. So let's reserve this because of course we don't like the words here. Let's see the other. Involves arriving at independent conclusions irrespective of who is presenting the argument. Yes, the charisma. So a lot of times, we get very persuaded by the charisma and the way it is. But reasoning tells you that it's the aura of the person that is driving you, not the content. Definitely, this is true. This can't be my answer. Involves an awareness of underlying assumptions in an argument and gap in one's own knowledge. Yes, rationality is going to tell you what is discernible fact and what is just a mere fantasy or a dream driven thought of yours. So, yes, this is also true, which means we were right in our option. The correct answer is going to be option B. Okay, let's get to the next. The author refers to ancient Greek philosophers too. So why has there been a mention of the ancient Greek philosophers? Okay, to highlight the influence of their thinking on the development of Pinker. No, it's not about their thinking. Influencing their thinking. Indicate the various similarities that their thinking between their thinking. Now again, it was not about the similarity. This can't be. Reveal gap in Pinker's discussion on the importance of ethical considerations in rational behavior. Yes. Now, the one thing that Pinker didn't take into account very vehemently, very extensively was the ethics. This is where the Greek philosophers came in. So, yes, this is true as per the passage, likely to be an answer. Show how dreams and visions have for centuries influenced subconscious behavior and path-breaking invention. No, that's not. I mean, the mention of epiphany has been done, but that's not the reason as to why the ancient Greek philosophers have been mentioned. So he refers to it. Why? Because he wanted to put in the angle of morality and ethics, which gets us to the correct answer being option C. Okay, let's get to the last question of this passage. Question number 8 says the author mentions Kekule's discovery of the structure of benzene and Mozart's symphony to illustrate the point that. So why has this been mentioned? That we wanted to talk about such great inventions that have been done by these wonderful artistic people, and of course people who have been exemplary in the field of science, have had their ideas not come from an epiphany, which was simply an intuition and not always propelled by any sort of logical thinking. And I think the one option that reads that out loud becomes option B. So that great innovations across varied fields can stem from flashes of intuition and not always. So it's not always logic. There are other ways also to come to it. But then what has to sustain further must be the logic. Let's see the other options. To point that it is not just the creative arts, but also scientific. No, it's not about the field. It's trying to be talking about the array. So be it creative or be it scientific, epiphany can happen anywhere. That's how it was. Pinker's conclusion on sequential reasoning are belied by European achievements, which in the past were more rooted in subconscious bursts of, no, that's not what the passage spoke about. Unlike the sciences, human achievement in other fields are a mix of logical reasoning and spontaneous epiphany. No, it was also in science. So this again can't be an answer. And with that, we come to an end. And I hope all of the answers are absolutely clear. Let's get on to the next passage, everyone. On to the next passage. Now, this one again is a very interesting passage. The passage starts with the biggest challenge the nutmeg skulls by Ghosh throws down is to the prevailing understanding. Prevailing means something that is already existing. So the prevailing understanding of when the climate crisis started. So the biggest challenge is when exactly did it start? Now most of us have accepted that it started with the widespread use of the coal at the beginning of the industrial age in the 18th century and worsened with the mass adoption of oil and natural gases. So the most potent understanding that we have is that it started with the beginning of the widespread use of the coal. Now, Ghosh takes this history at least 3 centuries back to the start of the European colonialism in the 15th century, but Ghosh wants us to rewind and go 300 years back. He starts the book with the 1621 massacre by Dutch invaders determined to impose a monopoly on nutmeg cultivation and trade in the Banda Islands in today's Indonesia. So he goes about, in fact, the book, in fact, has its opening lines of a mention of the 1621 massacre by the Dutch invaders, who actually wanted to impose a monopoly on the nutmeg cultivation. Not only do the Dutch systematically depopulate the island through genocide, they also try their best to bring nutmeg cultivation into plantation mode. So not only did they do a mass killing, which is a genocide, they also wanted to bring it to plantation mode. These are the 2 points to which Ghosh returns through examples from around the world. And these are the 2 points which we have to hold tight to because this is what he's going to keep returning to. One, how European colonists decimated not only indigenous population but also indigenous understanding of the relationship between the humans and the earth, right? So they of course wanted to grow something which probably was not maintained by the status quo of nature. So they wanted to do that, and they not only disrupted the indigenous understanding between the relationship of the humans and the earth, they also did a mass dissemination. Two, how this was an invasion not only of humans but of the earth itself, and how it continues to the present day by looking at nature as a resource to exploit. And this goes to say how, let alone the humans, I mean, let that be aside. It's also about how we have been exploiting and treating the earth as a resource. We know we are facing more frequent and severe heat waves, storms, flood, droughts, wildfires due to climate change. We know our expansion through deforestation, dam building, canal cutting, in short, terraforming, the word Ghosh uses, has brought us repeated disasters. So basically, terraforming, terra is a root word which means terrestrial, land, and forming is you're making new forms out of it. Are these the response of an angry Gaia who has finally had enough? So now the way the Earth seems to be responding, is this actually the voice of that angry Gaia whose rights were actually taken back then when the exploitation happened? By using the word curse in the title, the author makes it clear that he thinks so, and the author has made it very clear that it is the curse of those people, those indigenous people that were wiped out, that we are now eventually being wiped out. I use the pronoun who. I use the pronoun who knowingly because Ghosh has quoted many non-European sources to inquire into the relationship between humans and the world around them so that he can question the prevalent way of looking at Earth as an inert object to be exploited to the maximum. And to which the author goes about by saying that I use the pronoun who knowingly. So he's doing this purposely because Ghosh, of course, has quoted many non-European sources to inquire into the relationship. He's, of course, quoted a lot of non-European relationships to be able to give, more stress to the relationship between humans and the world around them, so that he can actually later go on to question the prevalent way. So, what should be actually the way of looking at Earth? As Ghosh's texts, notes, and bibliography show once more, none of this is new. And he's written it, but it's not new information. There have always been challenges in the way European colonists looked at other civilizations and at Earth. So there has been history has been replete with incidences wherein the European colonists have actually done mass discrimination. It is just that the invaders and their myriad backers in the field of economics, politics, anthropology, philosophy, literature, technology, physics, chemistry, biology have dominated global intellectual discourse. It's just that since they have done so well in the other fields, one doesn't really take into account the kind of discrimination that they have done or the kind of exploitation that they have done. There are other points of view that we can hear today if we listen hard. So there's more contention provided we listen hard enough. Those observing global climate negotiations know about the Latin American way of looking at Earth as a Panchamama, Mother Earth. They also know how such a framing is just provided lip service and is ignored in the substantive portions of the negotiation. So, I mean, there have been a lot of negotiations where they say that maybe we have to go back to the indigenous way. But these are all lip reads, and there is nothing more that seems to be happening. In the Nutmeg Skulls, Ghosh explains why. He shows the extent of the vested interest in the oil economy, not only for oil exporting countries, but also for the superpower like the US that controls oil drilling, oil prices, and oil movement around the world. Many of us know power utilities are sabotaging decentralized solar power generation today because it hits their revenue and control, and how the other points of view are so often drowned out. So in the book, of course, he's told us why. And then to which the passage goes about by saying that these superpowers like the US, they tend to be controlling the oil prices, the drilling, the movement all around. Many of us, of course, know that these power utilities are sabotaging. They're clearly annihilating the decentralized solar power generation today because of the kind of revenues and control. And how the other points are also important, but they're often drowned out and nobody gives importance to. So it tells us maybe why the climate is acting the way it is acting, and it's throwing light upon the action and calling for immediate rectification. Okay, let's get on to the questions. Which one of the following, if true, would make the reviewer's choice of the pronoun who for Gaia inappropriate? Okay, now we know in the passage, in fact, the last passage, that he's purposely used it, right? So now he's purposely used it, and then again, why? Because he says that I use the pronoun who knowingly because Ghosh has quoted many non-European sources to inquire about the relationship between the human and the world around them so that he can question the prevalent way of looking at the earth as an inert object to be exploited to the maximum. It's because Ghosh has used and has quoted many non-European sources, and that he talks about, he wants to question further as to what should be the prevalent way of going further and being able to identify Earth as an inert object, and which is why he uses the word who. So, which means that if we are in any way to talk about how, because the question clearly asks us that which make the reviewer choice of the pronoun who for Gaia inappropriate. So, what are we to do? We are simply to understand as to what should be against the information that has been mentioned in the passage. Now let's see. A. Non-European societies have perceived the earth as a non-living source for all resources. Well, yes, that could be one of the reasons why it's inappropriate, because currently they have considered this to be inappropriate because they have gauged it from the non-European society's perspective and what they perceive of the earth. But then the moment we say that they've perceived the earth as a non-living source for all resources, then clearly that would make the you or the who inappropriate. Makes sense. Let's reserve A to be the answer. Modern Western science discovers new evidence for the earth being an inanimate object. Now, this is not about the Western discovers, it has to be about the non-European societies. So this can't be, although the second half is the same. There is a direct cause-effect relationship between human activities and global climate change. Now, that's the reason why he used the word who. So it is the reason, it is an appropriate reason. So this can't be. Ghosh's book, has a different title, The Nutmeg's Revenge. Now, this is out of scope altogether. This is not what the answer is. I think there's only one answer, and that could have come out very directly, and that being answer option A. Let's see the next. All of the following can be inferred from the reviewer's discussion of the nutmeg curses except. So give me the one information that is now false. Let's start. Environmental preservation policy makers can learn a lot from non-European and pre-colonial societies. This is true. This was the very opening idea of the passage. The history of climate change is deeply intertwined with the history of colonialism. Yes, he took us 300 years back and said, let's begin with where it all started. This is true. The contemporary dominant perception of nature and the environment was put in place by processes of colonialism. Yes, now this is what was actually the dominant perception. Later is what we got to know as to the kind of exploitations also that happen. So this also be true, which means there will have to be only one answer, and the answer being D. Academic discourse have always served the function of raising awareness about environmental. Now, that has not happened, because had it always served as a function to raise awareness, people would have been much more aware. But somehow that's not happening, because it's the resource-driven mentality which seems to be functioning further, which gets us to, of course, our answer being option D. Question number 11. Which one of the following best explains the primary purpose of the discussion of the colonization of the Banda Island in the Nutmeg Curse? So understand, the question simply asks us, which of the following best explains the primary purpose? So why has there been a discussion of the colonization of the Banda Island, right? So of course, this was basically to tell us how the colonialism started and how this one idea, to be able to cultivate nutmeg actually became the reason as to why climate change happened, because from there came the oil invasion mentality, and rest is all history. So let's see whichever option takes that into account will be my answer. To illustrate the first instance in history when the processes responsible for climate change were initiated. No, that's not what the answer is. It's in fact about what sort of an action came into being and what eventually led to climate change. To illustrate the role played by the cultivation of certain crops in the plantation mode, that's not what it is again. To illustrate how colonialism represented and perpetuated the mindset that has led to the climate change, yes, that was the reason. I mean, we're looking for a purpose here, right? So to illustrate how systemic violence against, okay, now there's no mention of the violence. This is, of course, this is out of scope altogether, which gets us to our answer being option C. And the last one for this passage, on the basis of the information in the passage, which one of the following is not a reason for the failure of policies seeking to address climate change? Not a reason. So while all of these are reasons for failure, one of it is not a reason for its failure. So let's see which of the following is not a reason for its failure. The greed of organizations benefiting from, yes, it was all about the oil, right? The oil policies, I mean, the extraction of the oil in various ways. And that is, so there has been a greed of the organization, and which is why there's been failure of policy. No, this is true. This can't be my answer. The marginalized status of non-European ways of looking at nature. Yes, I mean the Latin American way, they knew, but nobody really put that to practice because the colonialism and the Europeans dominated it back then. So of course, this is also one of the reasons for the failure. Can't be my answer. The global dominance of oil economies and international politics built around it. Now, clearly, this was also, I mean, it was all an oil fight, right? And all politics also came around. So this was also a reason for failure. This can't be my answer. So by default, my answer will have to be D. The decentralized characteristic of renewable energy resources like solar power. Now, had this been there, we would have actually been able to address the climate change. But the oil companies sought to completely take this off the table and get their, non-renewable resources at the exploitation at the materialistic level. So of course this becomes my answer because the question is asked, this is false information with respect to the passage. So the answer becomes D. Why we say false is because it says which one of the following is not a reason. So this is false because this is not a reason. This is a reason. So the answer becomes option D. And with that, we come to an end to this passage. Right then, let's get on to the next passage and its understanding. First things first, the passage. In 2006, the Met Art Museum in the US agreed to return the Euphroneos crater, a masterpiece Greek urn that had been in the museum drawer since 1972. So it was something that the Met had, but then they agreed that they're going to return it. Now, what was it? It was a Greek urn. Urn generally is, the vessel in which the ashes are kept. In 2007, the Getty Art Museum in the US agreed to return 40 objects to Italy, including a marble Aphrodite, in the midst of looting scandals. So, of course, there were a lot of, rumors about looting scandals, and amidst all of that, it agreed to return 40 objects. In December, Sotheby's and a private owner agreed to return an ancient Khmer statue of a warrior pulled from auction 2 years before to Cambodia. And then another, turn of events happened, and then they returned a couple of things to Cambodia. Cultural property or patrimony. Laws limit the transfer of cultural property outside the source's country's territory, including outright export prohibition and national ownership laws. So cultural property, or what you say patrimony, are basically laws that limit the transfer of any cultural property. So being, of course, all of these, the museum pieces outside the source of country's territory. So that simply goes to say that you cannot send it outside the country's territory. And of course, exports are outrightly prohibited, and national ownership laws as well. Most art historians, archaeologists, museum officials, and policymakers portray cultural property laws in general as invaluable tools for counteracting the ugly legacy of Western cultural imperialism. Now, most historians, the archaeologists, the museum officials, the policymakers, they tend to portray this cultural property law in general as invaluable tool. So it's an invaluable tool because it's going to help them counteract this ugly legacy of the imperialistic. So when they came into rule, they took away all of the resources. They exploited the countries through and through. During the late 19th and the early 20th century, an era former Met director Thomas Hoving called the Age of Piracy. American and European art museums acquired antiquities by hook or by crook from grave robbers and souvenir collectors, bounty from digs and ancient sites in impoverished but art-rich source countries. So back in the 90s and the 20s, the former Met director, in fact, called it the age of piracy because the American and the Europeans looted at large. They took anything and everything by hook or by crook from the art-rich countries. Patrimony laws were intended to protect future archaeological discoveries against Western imperialist designs, and the law was essentially made so that these cultural properties can be protected. I surveyed 90 countries with one or more archaeological sites on UNESCO's World Heritage Site list, and my study shows that in most cases the number of discovered sites diminishes sharply after a country passes a cultural property law. Now, the irony comes up here, wherein the author has actually surveyed 90 countries, which has with one or more archaeological sites on UNESCO. And what has happened is, to his acknowledgement, they have discovered that the site diminishes sharply after the country passes the. So, the moment a cultural property, now the same law which is passed to protect your legacy, is what tends to diminish. There are 2,022 archaeological sites listed for those 90 countries. When you look into the history of the sites, you see that all but 21 were discovered before the passage of, and then of course it just goes to say that there were about 21 of them that were discovered before the passage of the law. Strict cultural patrimony laws are popular in most countries, and this is something which you find very evidently in most countries. But the downside may be that they reduce incentives for foreign governments, non-governmental organizations, and educational institutions to invest in overseas exploration because their effort will not necessarily be rewarded by opportunities to hold, display, and study what is uncovered. But it has a downside also because it doesn't give any incentive to anybody else to come and uncover and be able to reward it by opportunities. To the extent that source countries can fund their own archaeological project, artifacts and sites may still be discovered. Of course, the source country can. The survey has far-reaching consequences. It suggests that source countries, particularly the developing countries, should narrow their cultural property rights so that they can reap the benefits of new archaeological discoveries, which typically increase tourism and enhance cultural pride. To which the author goes about by saying that anybody who has these property laws should sort of, refine it, should curtail it a tad bit, because only when you have more very rich, very divergent archaeological discoveries being done is how the tourism and the cultural pride gets enhanced. This does not mean that these nations should abolish restriction on foreign excavation and foreign claims to artifact, which doesn't mean that you have to just, give it up. You don't have to relinquish it. China provides an interesting alternative approach for source nations eager for foreign archaeological investment. Now, China has come up with a very different, a very novel approach altogether. From 1935 to 2003, China had a restrictive cultural property law that prohibited foreign ownership of Chinese cultural artifacts. So they had this law wherein you could not have the ownership. In those years, China's most significant archaeological discovery occurred by chance. In 1974, when peasant farmers accidentally uncovered ranks of buried terracotta warrior, which are part of Emperor Qin's spectacular tomb system. Now, back in those years, China had made a significant archaeological discovery. In 2003, the Chinese government switched course, dropping its cultural property law and embracing collaborative international archaeological research. So they dropped it completely and they embraced what you call the collaborative. Collaborative is everybody coming together, international research. Since then, China has nominated 11 archaeological sites for inclusion in the World Heritage Site list, including 8 in 2013 and most ever in China. And since then, what has happened is other people have also come, have excavated those sites, figured out what significance does it have, and this is how it has been topping the list ever since. So that is what the passage seems to be about. A very easy passage at that. And with that, let's get to the questions. Now, it can be inferred from the passage that archaeological sites are considered important by some source countries because they, so towards the end, we did read the fact that they are going to help enhance the cultural diversity, and of course, aid tourism. So whatever will speak of this will be my answer. There's only one option to it, which becomes option D. Are a symbol of Western imperialism. Now, this was the reason as to why they were not, I mean, this is the reason why the loot used to happen, and hence the laws came to be. Are subject to strict patrimony laws. Now, it cannot be inferred that they're considered important for some source countries. We're talking about the source countries here, not any other country. Generate funds for future discoveries. Not again. I think there's only one option that speaks of it. Which one of the following statements, if true, would undermine the central idea of the passage? Now, the central idea, of course, of the passage is that we need to open up the research, or we need to some way or the other relax the laws, so that the other nations can also come. They can also, they can also have their share of understanding what the culture has to offer via archaeology, and that the tourism and all things alike can automatically boost. So if we want to undermine it, we of course want to talk about the fact that we don't want to be loosening these laws. We are okay with the way it is. And even if it is not going to bring us a lot of money, it is fine for as long as we are. And then, of course, they say that they are protecting their legacy. We will also go to say that there isn't a lot of legacy protection that is happening. Now, let's see. Museums established in economically deprived, archaeologically rich countries can display their antiques discovered. That was the reason why it was being done. So this is not undermining, this is strengthening the idea of the passage, not my answer. Affluent, archaeologically rich source countries can afford to carry out their own excavation. Yes, this was also the reason. This strengthens the idea, so this is not my answer. Western countries will have to apologize to countries for looting. Now, this was also strengthening because this was another reason as to why, which means there have to be D. Let's read D. UNESCO finances archaeological research in poor but archaeologically rich source countries. Now, over here, what seems to be happening is you have to get listed on the UNESCO. When there is some sort of dig that happens which actually offers a lot of cultural insight, that is where it gets listed. But now the passage goes to say that you having a artifact to yourself will not matter. UNESCO is going to finance and then going to, of course, assign that where exactly should the, or which are the following countries which are going to be declared in the list of being culturally rich. So if UNESCO seems to be financing and deciding who needs to be, then what is the whole point of having those artifacts to yourself in the first place? Obviously, you're doing it because you want to be on the list, but here it says that the UNESCO becomes the one who is going to be doing it. This is definitely undermining the idea, which makes the correct answer to be D. This was slightly tricky, so I hope you did understand why we have D as the answer. Let's go. Which one of the following statement best expresses the paradox of patrimony laws? So, of course, a paradox is going to be a contradiction. Now, the law was made so that one could protect their artifacts, thereby engage the tourism. But what was happening in the passage was, while there was protection that was happening, but there was no engagement that was increasing. So now let's see which of the following is going to read that out. They were intended to protect cultural property, but instead resulted in the withholding of national treasures from museums. No, in fact, they were given back to the museums where they belong to, and then displayed it with pride. This is not the answer. They were aimed at protecting cultural property, but instead reduced new archaeological discoveries. Yes, it decreased engagement. Definitely an answer for us. They were intended to protect cultural property, but instead resulted in a neglect. Now, there was no neglect of the historical sites. Not my answer. They were aimed at protecting cultural property, but instead reduced business for the auctioneers. Like, so no, there was no business angle to it. It was about being able to call more people for discovery, because the more people come, the more it gets, the more grander it gets, the more publicity it gets. But that is what was not happening. So this can't be the answer either, which means the correct answer will have to be option B. And the last one for this passage. From the passage, we can infer that the author is likely to advise poor but archaeologically rich source countries to do all of the following except. So what is the one piece of information which is false, which he would not endorse, which he would not advise the poor people to go ahead and do? Allow foreign countries to analyze and exhibit the archaeological finds made by the source country. Yes, this was true. He did say that you need to let this happen because this is how the engagement will grow. Can't be my answer. To find ways to motivate other countries to finance archaeological exploration in their country. Yes, this is also something that can be inferred. Not my answer. Adopt China's strategy of dropping. Now, the reason why China was talked about because it did something very noble, something which the others didn't do, and it made a great business for itself. So, of course, adopt China's strategy of dropping its cultural property laws and carrying out archaeological research through international collaboration. Now, this was also something that, of course, the author intended true, which means by elimination, there's only one option that remains. Fund institutes in other countries to understand archaeological exploration in the source country, reaping the benefit of cutting edge techniques. Nowhere such a mention has been done, which means the correct answer will have to be option D. And with that, we come to an end to the reading comprehensions. I hope all of these are absolutely clear, no confusion whatsoever. And with that, let's get to the next question, question number 17, wherein the instructions say that there is a sentence that is missing in the paragraph below. Look at the paragraph and decide where to fit the sentence. So the sentence being, for theoretical purposes, arguments may be considered as freestanding entities abstracted from their context of use in actual human activities. Okay, so we simply have to see where exactly are we going to be able to fit this the best. And now, first, get your hints from the statement. Statement ने अब क्या बोला है? For theoretical purposes. Theoretical purposes के लिए arguments. So, for theory, let's see. Arguments may be considered as freestanding. Arguments को freestanding उनकी individuality दे दो. Abstracted from their context of use in actual human activities, which have been abstracted from their context, अपने context से निकाल के actual use में आ रहे हैं. This is what is for theoretical purpose. Now let's see कहाँ पे ये बात हमारी बैठेगी. Where exactly is the statement going to fit right? An argument can be defined. Now, of course, over here we don't want to, because we first want to pitch the idea कि भाई argument क्या है. उसके बाद उसके theoretical purpose पे बात करेंगे ना. So then let's go. An argument can be defined as a complex symbolic structure where some parts, known as the premise, offer support to another part, the conclusion. Okay. Alternatively, an argument can be viewed as a complex speech act consisting of one or more acts of premising, which asserts the propositions in favor of the conclusion, an act of concluding, and an act of implicit marker, hence, therefore, that indicates that the conclusion follows from the premise. Okay, something and then dash. The relation of support between the premise and the conclusion. Now, अब हम लोग theoretical purpose के लिए भी नहीं आएंगे, because अभी भी हम लोग किस पे बात कर रहे हैं? Argument और premise पे ही बात कर रहे हैं, which means we have to continue on to that bit itself. We don't have to get on to any theoretical aspect, not as of now at least. So by 2 में तो ये नहीं आ रहा है. So option A is eliminated and so is D, because it says option 1. Now the relation of support between premises and conclusion can be cashed out in different ways. The premises may guarantee the truth of the conclusion or make its truth more probable. The premise may imply the conclusion and the premises may make the conclusion more acceptable or assertable. Dash. But depending on one's explanatory goals, there is also much to be gained from considering arguments that in fact occur in human communicative practices, which means अब हमारे पास कोई एक idea होना है जो human aspect को automatically डाल दे. And it has to, अब एकदम से humans तो आ नहीं सकते, which means there will have to be something which will have to loop in this idea. So when I put it in blank 3, wherein it says for theoretical purpose, अगर आप समझ लो, arguments are considered as freestanding entities, इसी idea पे further expand कर रहा है, abstracted from their context of use in actual human activities. They've been abstracted from what? The context of use जो हम actual activity में करते हैं. But depending on this, there is so much to be gained from considering argument as a fact, as in fact they occur. So I guess statement 3 is what is going to be the best fit, which makes our answer to be option 2. Always look for your hints. जैसे ही अपनी hint मिल जाएगी, हमें वहां पे उसका placement appropriately आ जाएगा. Okay, let's get on to question number 18 and let's see what do we have for this one. Beyond undermining the monopoly of the state on the use of force, armed conflict also creates an environment that can enable organized crime to prosper. So obviously वो undermine तो करता ही है monopoly of the state, but armed conflict एक ऐसा environment भी बना देगा जिसमें organized crime और बढ़ जाएगा. Okay, so let's see which of the following is going to be the most appropriate fit to. Dash. Linkages between illicit armed organized crime. अब ये तो तीनों पे है, तो obviously हमने दो का ही relationship बताया है. That is not something that will go. So 1 में तो नहीं आएगा. Let's eliminate option D. D is not going to be an answer for us. So linkages between illicit arms, organized crime and armed conflict can reinforce one another while also escalating and prolonging violence and eroding governance. डैश बियॉन्ड अंडरमाइनिंग द मोनोपोली. अभी भी हम लोगों ने मोनोपोली, अब इरोडिंग गवर्नेंस का आ गया है, बट ऑफ कोर्स वी आर स्टिल टॉकिंग अबाउट ऑल ऑफ द थ्री थिंग्स. वी हैव टू नैरो डाउन टू द फैक्ट दैट फोर्स, दैट इज आर्म कॉन्फ्लिक्ट यूज हो रहा है, एंड ऑफ कोर्स ऑर्गेनाइज क्राइम प्रॉस्पर हो रहा है. सो वी स्टिल नॉट बीन एबल टू नैरो डाउन टू दैट आइडिया. तो अभी टू में भी नहीं आएगा ये. So A stands eliminated. Financial gains from the crime can lengthen or intensify armed conflicts by creating revenue streams for non-state armed groups, the NSAGs. Dash. In this context, when hostilities cease and parties to a conflict move towards a peaceful resolution, the widespread availability of surplus arms. Surplus arms मतलब ये चीज, the fact that वो बहुत है, can contribute to a situation of criminalized peace that obstructs sustainable peace building effort. So clearly अब यहाँ पे बोल रहा है कि अगर ऐसा situation आएगा, hostilities और बढ़ेंगी, surplus arms and ammunitions होंगे, तो we come to a situation called criminalized peace, जो sustainable peace building efforts को खत्म करेगा. तो obviously एक cause चाहिए ना इस effect के लिए. Now when I say beyond undermining the monopoly of the state, तो governance को अलग हटा लो. आर्म कॉन्फ्लिक्ट एक ऐसा एनवायरनमेंट भी क्रिएट कर रहा है जहां ऑर्गेनाइज क्राइम प्रॉस्पर हो रहा है, और ऑर्गेनाइज क्राइम प्रॉस्पर होगा तो क्या होगा? इट विल ऑब्स्ट्रक्ट सस्टेनेबल पीस बिल्डिंग effort. So clearly this is an effect, and this statement becomes the cause for it, which means the most perfect insertion for this is going to be option 3, which makes C the answer for us. 4 में नहीं आएगा because it's the cause, it's not an effect. अगर effect बनाना है तो previous statement cause हो जाएगा, but that's not how the arrangement of the ideas seem to be. I hope this one was absolutely clear. Our answer is going to be option C. Okay, let's get to my favorite of the lot, the theta versions of the parajumbles. I hope everybody knows what a theta is. Theta is type in your answer, which simply goes to say कि आपका आंसर दिया नहीं है, आपको बताना है इसमें कौन सी चीज सही है. Okay, now if you read the instructions over here, 5 jumbled sentences related to a topic are given. 4 of them can be put together to form a coherent. Identify the odd sentence. Odd sentence, now again odd sentence भी निकालने के लिए bestest क्या करो, अपना series बना दो, right? So of the lot, this is going to be something that you will have to manually punch in. Thetas ही हैं अभी भी, and parajumble करना है जिसमें odd sentence को बता देना है. अपना series बनाते हैं, जो नहीं बैठेगा series में वो clearly बन गया मेरा odd statement. Let's start. Boa Senior, who lived through the 2004 tsunami, the Japanese occupation, and diseases brought by British settlers, was the last native of the island chain who was fluent in Bo. Okay. The indigenous population has been steadily collapsing since the island chain was colonized by the British settlers in 1858 and used for most of the following 100 years as a colonial penal colony. Okay. Taking its name from a now extinct tribe, Bo is one of the 10 great Andamanese language. So of course this is talking in relation to Bo. So मुझे पता है 1 and 3 तो साथ में है, मतलब वो कहीं नहीं जा रहे हैं अभी, right? It's not an odd statement for us until now, which are thought to date back to the pre-Neolithic human settlement of South Asia. The last speaker of an Asian tribal language has died in the Andaman Islands, breaking a 65,000-year link to one of the world's oldest culture. Okay, and though the language has been closely studied by researchers of linguistic history, Boa Senior spent the last few years of her life unable to converse with anyone in her mother tongue. So this talks about the last speaker, how she suffered from, what was the kind who lived through all of the ordeals that happened, and how she actually becomes this one great person who has been able to tell us about one of the great 10 Andamanese language, and something that we would have not been able to understand about the pre-Neolithic human settlement had she not been there. So of course the passage, again we know that 1 and 5 is also definitely going to be together because it speaks about it. Now in all of this, 4 becomes the opener because it's trying to be talking about the last speaker who is there, breaking the entire link is what becomes the the chain that is going to bind them together, because the series begins with the the speaker. Then let's talk the name of the speaker, what are the kinds of ordeals that she has of course witnessed, and how she could not converse with anybody in her mother tongue, and finally succumbed, and she was the last link to of course the pre-Neolithic human settlement. So while all of these clearly seem to be a pack, what be the series? It's okay. I think if we are even able to make a pack of the statements, it's enough. The one statement that doesn't fit anywhere becomes statement 2. So our answer becomes option 2 or statement 2, which is definitely going to be the odd one out, which is likely to be the one that is not fitting. I hope this one was clear. Of course, you could have spent more time being able to divide and make your series, but then I think this was pretty easy for us to be able to know. Same stuff, we have to identify the odd sentence, and so we'll keep making pairs. Whatever doesn't fit in our pair will become the answer. Although hard skills have traditionally ruled the roost, most companies are moving away from choosing prospective hires based on technical abilities alone. So hard skills are technical abilities. Companies are shaking off the old definition of an ideal candidate and ditching the idea of looking for a singularly perfect candidate altogether. Okay. Now, some job creations are frequently asking their candidates to demonstrate soft skills such as leadership and teamwork. They That's not to say that practical know-how is no longer required. Some jobs still call for highly specific expertise. The move towards prioritizing soft skills is a natural response to 3 years in the pandemic, says a senior recruiter of Sendler FSB. Now I know 3 and 5 do speak together, right? And then we have to also have a transition that though hard skills are important, but it's not just about that. They are wanting to not hire based on just the technical ability. So we want a transition of the idea also. So one is also definitely an act for us. Now, if I talk about why the technical skills, why are we moving from it, I have to mention as to why the technical skills also seem to be important. So I know for a fact that in all of this, we will also have 4, because 4 simply talks about the fact that it's nowhere do we say that practicals are not at all important. But of course, the soft skills are also equally important. So this may not be the series, but these are a pack together. The one option or the one statement that doesn't fit into the rhythm of the statement becomes 2. Because when you say companies are shaking off the old definition of an ideal candidate and ditching the idea of looking for a singularly perfect candidate altogether, it's not talking about the skill set at all, while all of the others are about the skill set, which means option 2 becomes the odd one out here. Moving on to the next question, question number 21. We now have what we call the parajumble. So no odd sentencing, we simply have to sequence the sentences together. Now we'll have to read all of them to be able to know which of the following is an opener. Make a mandatory pairs and go for it. Veena Sahajwala, a materials scientist of the University of New South Wales, believes there is a new way of solving this problem. Okay, so we are not beginning with this clearly, because she says there's this problem. So what is the problem? There's a pronoun. We need the mention of the pronoun. Her vision is for automated drones and robots to pick out components, put them into small furnace, smelt them at specific temperatures to extract the metals one by one before they are sent off to manufacturers for reuse. Okay. Now her is of course we know that she's going to come. So whatever it is, it has to be 1 and then only comes 2. However be the series. E-waste contains huge quantities of valuable metals, ceramics, and plastics that could be salvaged, recycled, although currently not enough of it is done, right? So I know that maybe this problem could be e-waste management. So I know for a fact that the opening will have to be 3. Now, one can make a mandatory pair with 3 because it says this problem, right? So this problem becomes the problem that is e-waste management. So now 3 and 1 are definitely a pair. Now between 4 and 2 we have to see. Now she plans, now a rule of noun pronoun helped us. It's always the first person pronoun first and then. So it will always be she and then her and not the other way around. So clearly it will have to be a 4 between 2 and 1. So she plans to build micro factories that can tease apart the tangle, and then further talking about how exactly is she going to build these micro factories. She's going to have these drones and robots pick out the component. So a very easy parajumble there. The correct answer is going to be 3, 1, 4, and 2. Perfect. Let's get on to the next, a parajumble once again. Centuries later, formal learning is still mostly based on reading, even with the widespread use of other possible education affecting technologies such as film, radio, and television. One of the immediate and recognizable impacts of the printing press was on how people learned, In the scribal culture, it primarily involved listening, so memorization was paramount. Okay, all right. Seems to be like an opener sort of a thing also. The transformation of learners from listeners to readers was a complex social and cultural phenomena, but it was not until the industrial era that the concept of universal literacy took root. The printing press shifted the learning process. So, of course, all of this is about the printing press. So, I know I have to start with two. Then the kind of evolution that it made, which makes the next statement to be four, because as listening and memorization gradually gave way to reading and learning no longer required the presence of a mentor, it could be done privately. So the next idea is going to be how this transition from the learning to the listening, from the learners to of learners from listeners actually happened because of the advent of printing press. So which means the next will have to be three and the last will have to be one. This was a super easy parajumble and we had the answers right away. Okay, and the last two questions. Question number 23. The passage given below is followed by four alternative summaries. So we'll have to see the paragraph and see which of the following is going to take into account the most ideal way of putting this, putting the essence, the gist of the passage together. The weight of society's the weight of society's expectation is hardly a new phenomenon, but it has become particularly draining over recent decades, perhaps because expectations themselves are so multifarious and contradictory. So the reason why the burden of expectation seems to be going about is because the expectation perhaps have become very multifarious and contradictory. The perfectionism of the 1950s was rooted in the norms of mass culture and captured in famous advertising images of the ideal white American family that now seem self-satirizing. In that era, perfectionism meant seamlessly conforming to values and behavior and appearance, chiseled confidence for men, demure graciousness for women. So there was a classic understanding of what perfectionism was. The perfectionist was under pressure to look like everyone else, only more so. The perfectionists of today, by contrast, feel an obligation to stand out through their idiosyncratic style and wit if they are to gain a foothold of attention in the society. So, of course, the passage tends to be talking about the perfectionism in 1950, how it meant conforming to the values, the behaviors, and the appearance. But perfectionists of today, in contrast, feel an obligation to stand out. Now, whatever is going to speak about this will become my answer. A. The desire to attract attention is so deep rooted in individual consciousness that people are willing to go to any lengths to achieve it. Now, nowhere does the passage talk about the fact that there is any length that they're going to go through. To say any length, which means there is no stopping. I think this is out of scope and we do not take any such answer. A can't be an answer. Though long standing, the pressure to appear perfect and thereby attract attention has evolved over time from one of conformism to one of non-conformism. Definitely takes into account all things that we have. So, can likely be an answer. The image of perfectionism is reflected in and perpetuated by the media. Now, I think throughout the passage, we didn't talk about the media. It was a mass culture. That means all of the masses sort of embraced it. Out of scope, the pressure to appear perfect has been the cause of tension and conflict. Again, no such mention. This was super easy. I wonder why CAT even gave this. This is clearly going to be option B. And the last one, so you all can now rejoice. The last passage. Gradually, life for the island birds are improving. Antarctic prions and white-headed petrels, which also nest in burrows, had managed to cling on in some sites while pests were on the island. Their numbers are now increasing. It's fantastic and so exciting, Shaw says. As birds return to breed, they also poop. This adds nutrient to the soil, which in turn helps the plants to grow back stronger. Tall plants then help burrowing birds hide from predatory squaws. It's this wonderful feedback loop, Shaw says. Today, the pretty paddock that Houghton first experienced has been transformed. The tussock is over your head and you're dodging all these penguin tunnels, she says. The orchid and the tiny herb that had been protected by fencing have started turning up all over the place. So the passage essentially illustrates this gradual, shift that has happened. The gradual, let's say, not shift, the enhancement of life that has happened on the island, particularly which is benefiting the birds that we have. The paragraph then further tends to be supporting the idea. It goes to, strengthen the idea that raising the bird population is attributed to the absence of the pests in the island. This entire elimination of the pest has felicitated, in fact, more bird returns, and breeding of the activities has contributed positively to the ecosystem. Further, of course, the passage also talks about the invaluable role of the bird droppings, the poo, which tends to enrich the soil, thereby supporting the growth of the plants furthermore. So that is what we have to speak about. And let's see. In the absence of the pest, life on the island is now protected, and there has been a revival of a variety of plants and birds. Yes, when you say revival, it becomes an umbrella terminology, takes into account all things. Let's reserve this. There's an increasing number of predatory birds and plants in the island despite the presence of pests. Now, there's no despite the presence, the pests seem to be going back. And it's just not about the predatory. I mean, nowhere in the passage do we know. Now, we know that Antarctic prions are predatory, but does the passage say that? No, you cannot add information, not the answer. There is a huge positive transformation in the ecosystem of the island when brought under environmental. There's no environmental protection that has been brought under. It's out of scope again. Flowering plants, herbs, and birds are now being protected on this wonderful Antarctic. Okay, this talks nothing about the absence of the pests, how the revival of the species has happened, how the bird poop has actually helped, and how beautiful that landscape has automatically come to be. So this is not going to be the answer, which says the correct answer is going to be option A. And with that, we come to an end to the Slot 3 2023 analysis. I hope all of the options, everything done in depth, has been absolutely clear for you. I will see you guys again with maybe another mock analysis. But until then, like I mentioned in the starting, keep practicing, because that is going to be one of the best indicators, the best benchmark for you to be able to analyze your performance. Thank you so much for offering your valuable time. I will see you guys very soon once again. Have a great day, everybody.